All right, good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully you all got a civil rights movement handout from the front. All right, so today we are going to be talking about the civil rights movement that lasted from the 1950s through the 1960s. One thing that you'll notice during this lecture is a lot of the problems that they're talking about in the 50s and 60s are actually still around today, and then people are still protesting over it today. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. Also, sorry for the squeaking. I'm old, I can't hear it, but apparently there's a high-pitched squeak that this microphone causes, but we can't find the other one, so sorry about that. Our objective for today: understand why African American civil rights movement moves from peaceful to violent protests. Peaceful to violent protests. And that is the key point there. The peaceful to violent. All right, so moving on, we are going to talk about a court case to start out with, and it's probably one that you've all heard of. It is called Brown versus the Board of Education. And this was brought about by a man named Oliver Brown. He moved to Topeka, Kansas. He tried to enroll his daughter in an all-white school there. The school board said no, and so he sued them. Obviously, Oliver Brown was an African American. That is why his daughter could not go to the all-white school. So this case makes it all the way to the Supreme Court in 1954. And what happens as a result of this case? Oliver Brown wins. The Supreme Court rules unanimously in his favor. And in doing so, it declares that school segregation is illegal. So Brown versus Board of Education rules that school segregation is illegal. All right? So they had tried to set it up throughout the years, throughout the decades, that, hey, we're going to have segregated schools. They're going to be separate. We'll have white schools. We will have black schools, and we're going to keep them separate, but they'll be equal. That was the selling point for this. They will be equal. They'll have the same books. Teachers will be just as qualified at both schools. It'll be absolutely equal, but that was not the case, specifically in the South. And that's what ends up bringing an end to segregated schools. But it doesn't happen right away. It's not like the Supreme Court rules in 1954, okay, school segregation is done. You guys have to integrate the schools, and it happens. That is not the case. It takes several years. And a lot of states and school districts kind of drag their feet as this is going on. And one of those cases is known as the Little Rock Nine. And this takes place in 1957 in Little Rock, Arkansas. And what happens here is the NAACP. It's the, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. They select 9 students, 9 African American students that have excellent attendance, excellent grades. And they say, you guys are going to be our role models, and you're going to enroll in this school in Little Rock, Arkansas. That's an all-white school. They enroll, try to go to school, and the school is not having any of it. The governor, a wonderful guy by the name of Orville Faubus. That is not a wonderful guy. Actually, that was sarcasm, and you don't have to remember his name, so don't worry about spelling. He is the governor of Arkansas. And he basically says, black kids will come to this school over my dead body. And he calls in the Arkansas National Guard, as you can see in this picture. But in this case, he called them in to block the students from coming in. All right? He called the National Guard to block the students from coming in. Well, this goes on, and they actually close all black schools in 1958 as a result of this. Okay, so no school for all of 1958, which you guys would probably be okay with, but the rest of the nation was not. Eventually, the president tells Orville that, hey, you need to let these kids go to school. The Supreme Court ordered it, and you need to desegregate these schools. And what he did is he sent the 101st Airborne, an Army division, he sent them down to Little Rock, and he basically had them put the National Guard under federal control, and that's where we have this picture. We have U.S. soldiers and the National Guard escorting 9 black African-American students into an all-white high school in Little Rock, Arkansas. So as a result of this, the result, I kind of meant to put that part under this. The NAACP fights very hard to register African Americans in white schools, and the governor closes all black schools. So that part should be under results, I'm sorry. 1 year later, the students are allowed into the high school. All right. So now we're getting to the objective, and we're getting to the first part of our objective, and that is nonviolent protests. We're going to talk about 3 different types of nonviolent protests, and by nonviolent protests, it's just what it sounds like. They weren't fighting people, they weren't raising their hands to people, they weren't destroying stuff, they were nonviolent protests. And one of the first ones to show up was in the 1960s. This started in North Carolina. And you have to remember, the South at this time still had Jim Crow laws. And Jim Crow laws separate white facilities from black facilities. So if you go into a restaurant, they have white seating areas and black seating areas. If you go on a bus, white seating areas, black seating areas, almost everywhere you go. And what these sit-ins did in the 1960s is African Americans would go and sit in the white section, maybe order some coffee, and not leave for as long as they could. Now, do you think these guys were met with, really nice free greetings? Hi, welcome to the cafe. What can I get you? No, they were oftentimes met with violence. Police were called on them constantly. They were beaten and dragged out of restaurants. But they never turned violent. Okay, the protesters never turned violent. So that is one type of nonviolent protest. Next, we have the bus boycott. This happened in Montgomery, Alabama. This lasted from December 1955 through December of 1956, so most of a year. All right? And what happens is, I'm sure you've all heard the story of Rosa Parks. Who can summarize the story of Rosa Parks for me real quick? Go ahead. Yes. So Rosa Parks, she's an older lady. She gets off work. She's tired. She's had a long day. She gets on the bus. Most of the seats are full. There's nowhere for her to sit in the colored section, so she sits right down in the white section. A couple stops later, some more people get on. They say, hey, Rosa, you're in the white section. You need to move so I can take my seat. And Rosa says no. She refuses to move, and she is arrested. And as a result of this, Martin Luther King, pictured here, he calls on the people of Montgomery to boycott the bus system. To boycott the bus system, meaning they would walk, they would ride bikes, they'd carpool, they'd get around however they could as long as they weren't using the city's buses. Eventually, this boycott does lead to open seating in Montgomery's buses, and it achieves this through nonviolent protest. Okay, so the bus boycott. Just know that it was in Montgomery, Alabama, and it was a nonviolent type of protest. Finally, the last one on your notes. We have Freedom Riders. Freedom Riders were not only made up of African Americans, they were made up of people from the North. African Americans, a lot of college students, a lot of white businessmen, small store owners, whoever felt the need to do so, they would become freedom riders. And what their ultimate goal is, they would buy tickets on buses in the North, sit in the wrong section of the bus with the intention of riding down to somewhere in the South to help African Americans register to vote. All right? So say they would buy 6 bus tickets, 5 of them would sit in the section they're not supposed to make a point, just to say, hey, this is where we're gonna sit. We bought a ticket just like that guy. We're sitting where we want to sit. But they would always leave one person sitting where they were supposed to sit. Any guesses as to why they would leave one person sitting where they're supposed to sit? No? Well, if the other 5 would get arrested, that 6th person who was sitting where he's supposed to sit would have bail money for him. And he would go and bail them out of jail, and they would probably ride another bus back home while sitting in the wrong seat. Okay? So, freedom riders is another form of nonviolent protest. These nonviolent protests work, but they take a long time to work. They're not very radical. They don't, make big splashy headlines. And people are getting a little upset with this. So there are 2 reasons as to why the movement turned from nonviolent to violence. First reason is that it took a long time. Took a long time. Brown versus Board of Education was in 1954. We still had segregated schools throughout the South in the 60s. Okay, this was taking a long time. It was taking a long time for Jim Crow laws to be repealed. Second reason, change was gradual and not revolutionary. Change was gradual and not revolutionary. So kind of back to the first point is it takes a long time to do this stuff. It doesn't just change with, the snap of the fingers or over the next day. It takes a long time. So because of these 2 reasons, we have some new players in this civil rights movement. We're going to start with one guy named Malcolm X. Okay, Malcolm X is born right here in Omaha. This is a park with a memorial. It's about 35th and Evans Street in North Omaha. He was born Malcolm Little. And here in Omaha, everywhere he went, he experienced a lot of violence. Here in Omaha, his house was burned down. And his father was murdered. Because of these 2 reasons, his mom understandably suffered a nervous breakdown. And so Malcolm's pretty much on his own. And he is raised in different foster care homes, moved around until he becomes of age to just kind of break out on his own. So he's born in Omaha, his house is burned down, his dad is murdered, and his mom goes crazy. Okay, so not the greatest upbringing, not the most stable upbringing. Definite reason for this guy to be a little upset. All right? Once he gets older, he gets arrested for burglary. He's trying to steal some stuff. I'm sure he needed it. I'm sure there was a good reason. But he gets arrested for burglary, and he's sentenced to 10 years in prison. And he ends up serving about 6. But it is this time in prison that Malcolm Little becomes Malcolm X. He meets up with a guy by the name of Elijah Muhammad. Elijah Muhammad. And he is the leader of the Nation of Islam. And the Nation of Islam is a religious group made up of African Americans who study Islam. Okay? And their views were a little bit different than, typical Muslims. Their views were a little bit more extreme. And one thing that Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam preached is that white people are evil and that races should be separate. Which is kind of ironic since we are fighting segregation, or they are fighting segregation throughout this time period. And here we have Elijah Muhammad telling Malcolm X that white people are evil, we need to segregate, but stuff still needs to be equal. We need to have our own country, ideally back in Africa. We can all move back to Africa and leave these white people behind. Malcolm X really takes this to heart, okay? And really gets the ball rolling with his speeches. He is a wonderful public speaker, and people attend his rallies and start listening to his words. And his words boiled down to this: ballots or bullets. Malcolm X knows that the only way to get things changed is through law and through the government and through elected officials. And African Americans at this time do not vote. I mean, some of them vote, but in the South, they're met with violence, they're met with voter fraud, so they tend not to vote. So Malcolm X says, hey, you guys need to demand your vote. It is your right to vote, guaranteed by the 13th Amendment. No. Which amendment was that? Right to vote for everyone. 19th? I can't remember. Anyway, he said, you need your ballots. And if they don't give you your ballots, if you're not allowed to vote, if you're stuck and not allowed to vote and they're telling you no, then it's time to bring bullets. Time to act with violence. 15th, thank you. I was thinking 14th, but I knew that was wrong. All right, so eventually Malcolm X is assassinated. And he feels this coming. He apparently the night before said he had a dream about it. He knew that his time was coming to an end. In 1965, he was giving a speech in New York, a small theater in New York, when 3 men rushed the stage, shooting him 15 times. So in 1965, he was murdered by 3 men in New York. This is a picture of the crime scene afterwards. Over on the left, you see some blood. In the back, there's circled bullet holes in the wall there. So these guys trying to kill them really wanted him dead. All right, moving on.
By the 1960s, the problem of racial injustice is no longer limited to the South, but rural areas. 69% of American blacks are now living in cities, often in embattled inner-city neighborhoods.
There's a kind of sense of abandonment in central city areas. There's growing poverty, crime, just very poor quality of life. And then you see explosions of anger among people that are left behind.
When the news of the Watts riot broke in the summer of 1965, Johnson was vacationing at the LBJ Ranch in Texas. It was just at the time he was putting into effect the whole Howard University affirmative action program of trying to create real, genuine opportunity for racial minorities, African Americans in particular. So the sense that the expectations that he had created had somehow led to this maelstrom was deeply troubling. And of course, more than anything else, that kind of tore apart the country and the coalition that he and Kennedy and Truman and FDR had worked so painstakingly to assemble.
Disillusioned, impatient, an increasing number of African Americans adopt a more militant approach. Black power.
Many people point to the origins of the idea of Black Power to a series of appearances and rallies going across Mississippi of Martin Luther King and Stokely Carmichael, the young new leader of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, in 1966, in which King was trying to lead the crowds in chants of freedom now, and Carmichael would follow with chants of Black Power.
You got sitting in front of your television set and listen to every day negative violence, never accomplishes anything about He's scaring the hell out of North Vietnam.
The black faction decides to kick the whites out altogether, saying, it's very nice you helped us, but now we want to run our own show, and you should go work in white communities, which, after all, is where the problem of racism is.
And so they begin to develop an ideology not of integration, but of separation, not of American patriotism, but of black nationalism.
For instance, consider the Black Panther Party formed in Oakland, California in 1965 under the leadership of Bobby Seale and Huey P. Newton. It begins by kind of putting black cultural nationalism and Marxist-Leninist revolutionary thought together with the idea of kind of creating a revolution of freeing Black America through struggle.
The Great Race Riots of the 1960s. They didn't really have leaders, but there were kind of self-appointed spokesmen who stood up saying, this is Black Power in action.
In Detroit, an obscure black nationalist group, the Nation of Islam, gains prominence. The most celebrated black Muslim, as whites often refer to him, is Malcolm X.
Legislation and change the conditions that our people face in the South.
Blacks in the South had been so discriminated against, so segregated, that to break through those barriers was such a triumph, they didn't need anything else for a while. But if you'd been in Harlem, or you had been in Detroit or Chicago, segregation crumbled long ago. For those people, the socioeconomic discrimination was much more important, and there weren't so many breakthroughs. And so there was a lot of appeal of more quote, militant people to the North. What we see is a militant versus moderate split.
And this certainly terrified a lot of whites who thought, if this is Black Power in action, let's return to white power. So those two things together really marked an end to the civil rights movement, which had accomplished its main programmatic goals.
The civil rights movement ends legalized segregation, but it also awakens expectations of social and economic equality that laws alone cannot meet, and that in many respects, even today, remain unfulfilled.
All right. So as the video stated, in the North, there wasn't segregation. There wasn't outright segregation. All right. But what happened is after World War II, we have veterans coming home. They're starting families. 1950s roll around and the suburbs kind of spring up around cities. So white families move out of the inner city areas out to the suburbs. Okay. This leaves minorities in the cities. Now, the city government is not going to spend a bunch of money in these inner city areas. They're going to spend the money on these new suburbs, okay, to keep all those people happy. Now, most of these minorities see this, and they're upset by this, and this is what causes this civil unrest. So in the South, we had outright segregation. You're black, you cannot drink from this water fountain. In the North, it was different. It wasn't outright lawful segregation, but it was there, all right? And this brings about some race riots. And you don't have to memorize, just kind of jot down a little bit for some of these different race riots. But the general causes is that the civil rights process was moving way too slow. Way too slow. Also, 2 civil rights acts were passed in 1964 and 1965. You might want to jot that down. Lyndon B. Johnson passes Civil Rights Acts 1964 and 1965. And these go a long way to ending segregation, but it's not enough. Okay? And it did little to relieve the economic inequality. So the cause is, it's moving too slow, and the Civil Rights Acts of 64 and 65 didn't do enough for economic inequality. Okay, so we have a race right here in Omaha in 1966. It takes place at 24th and Lake. There's fires and riots, cause millions of dollars in damage. They are protesting racial inequality in North Omaha. So in 1966 for Omaha, put protesting racial inequality, millions of dollars in damage. We're going to go to Newark, New Jersey in 1967. In Newark, a cab driver, an African-American cab driver, is arrested and then just kind of never heard from. His family tries to contact him, find out where he is so they can bail him out. The government has nothing for him. And this leads to a riot that lasted 6 days and kills 23 people. So in New Jersey, we have a cab driver who was arrested and not heard from again. Riots ensue. They last 6 days and kill 23 people. Detroit, Michigan. Also, basic inequality in the inner city. They weren't getting the economic relief that they needed. They were being ignored. And in Detroit, the protests last for 5 days with 43 people dead. There are 7,000 arrests. And finally, one more in Omaha in 1968. A man named Wallace is running for president. He is very openly racist. Very openly racist. Runs on the platform that, yes, I'm going to bring back segregation. I'm going to repeal the Civil Rights Acts. We're going to get rid of all of this. And this guy is coming to speak in Omaha at the Civic Auditorium, which I believe is torn down now, right? Yeah, it's not there anymore. So he goes to speak at the Civic Auditorium. City leaders allow this. This makes African Americans very upset for many reasons. And they start protesting. People start fires and cause damage to several buildings again. All right? So not only is segregation alive and well in the South, in the North, we have African Americans and minorities rioting because they are not treated equally financially. Here we have Stokely Carmichael. Kind of running low on time, so I'm going to go through this as quick as I can. Stokely Carmichael is a radical leader. He's the leader of CORE, and that is the Congress of Racial Equality. Don't worry about CORE. Okay, that's what he starts out with. But then he turns to the idea of violence. They need violence to get this going. So he becomes the leader of the SNCC, which starts out as, write this down, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. But Stokely Carmichael is preaching black power. And he is preaching, don't turn the other cheek. If they hit you, hit them back. And he actually changes the SNCC from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and he changes it to the Student National Coordinating Committee. Student National. So it goes from nonviolent to national, meaning this coordinating committee will now support violent protests as they pop up around the country. And Carmichael starts out as kind of a peer to Martin Luther King. But as he sees this is not working, he moves to more violent protests. Also, we have black power popping up, not only in the U.S., but all over the world. Under nationalism. This is the 1968 Olympics in Mexico City. 2 African-American athletes raised their fists with a black glove on as a protest, obviously a nonviolent protest. But this is big because the rest of the world sees that America isn't this great, wonderful country where everybody's welcome and the streets are lined with gold. Okay, the rest of the world starting to see America for what it is. All right, and I didn't just put this fist on the keynote. It's been here for a couple years now. So this has been around for a long time. We see this a lot now with the Black Lives Matter movement. Okay? Self-defense was another one. Martin Luther King, he preaches turn the other cheek. Don't retaliate. Okay? If they take your lunch, offer them your dessert. If they hit you in the left side of the face, give them your right side. But this changes with Stokely Carmichael and Black Power and Malcolm X. And they state, if they're hitting you, hit back. Okay? Fight back. Meet violence with violence. Also at this time, a group known as the Black Panthers starts up in Oakland, California in 1966. This is a political organization, and this is what you want to write down, and this is what's still going on today. Black Panthers' sole goal was to stop police violence towards African Americans. They wanted to stop police violence towards African Americans. And this movement grew very quickly, and there were groups all throughout the country in a matter in short time. Their beliefs and their goals, they called for an immediate end to police brutality. They wanted equal employment for African Americans. They wanted housing and justice for all. So, end police brutality, employment for African Americans, housing and justice for all. And their end goal is to get more African Americans elected into political office. So the goal of the Black Panthers, end police brutality, get African Americans elected. And they did this with militant actions. They dressed in black berets and black leather jackets, as you see here, and they would hold armed patrols in black neighborhoods, keeping a lookout for police brutality. Okay? And it was these armed patrols that brings about the attention of the FBI. The FBI sees the Black Panthers as a communist organization and says, no mas. All right. So our summary for today. In the mid to late 60s, the civil rights movement becomes more radical. It is led by a group of African Americans who want the movement to proceed faster than it was. Okay, we only have a little over a minute. You can go ahead and put your stuff away. Sit quietly until the bell rings.
Thank you, sir.
Mm-hmm.
This is my 12, that is correct.